I know there's several people, there's at least one people who's probably pretty bored with seeing my films, apart from myself in the room. So I thought what I'd do though, because I'm sure there are people here who don't know my films, is to do a very quick kind of little survey of the last 40 years. And then quite quickly, like in half an hour, not show whole films, just show extracts and weird stuff I did. In fact, I'm going to start with a film that no one's seen since 1976. And I just recently restored it, not actually for your benefit, but I thought, why not do it here? Why not do it here first? So I'm going to start with that. And then, so I'll do a quick kind of survey of the work I've been doing over this long period. And then I thought what I'd do is look at some recent films, because I know, lots of people here are animators, and talk a bit about the details of why I made them, the choices I made. I've also, perhaps how I financed them might be interesting. But I mean, anyway, you can ask questions about that. But the key thing about showing recent films is that I know I haven't kind of reinvented the history of them, as you tend to do in the past with films that are like 20 years old. They've got this kind of huge, because I've shown them so many times and introduced them so many times, they've got this whole kind of fictional element, performance element to actually showing them. But I'm going to show you the most recent, at the end I'm going to show you the most recent film that I've completed, and I've got a lot of information about how it was made. And I'm also going to show something that no one else has seen, and rightly so, because it's a real mess, but that's the film I'm working on at the moment. So I've got some extracts, I just put them together this morning, and I haven't really had a chance to look at them, but it's just as an example of how I work. And also a film that's just about to go into production, and I thought I might talk a little about that and how I raise money for it, if that's of interest. But so I'm going to do it in two halves. And the first half is, a quick survey, and I'm starting at when I was at Goldsmiths. I didn't study animation, and I didn't study film. Actually, I can't think of anything worse than studying animation, even though I've taught it a lot. I just see these people working away, in amazing detail and, incredible concentration and intensity. And the first thing I have to say is I'm really not that kind of a person at all. I'm very slapdash, and I'm not exactly chaotic, but I need to get results much more quickly than the average animator seems to be prepared to wait for. So so I have no background in animation at all, even though it seems like I've ended up teaching it an awful lot. I don't normally tell students that, of course. So when I was at Goldsmiths, I was studying fine art, and they had cameras there, Super 8 camera. So I did what every art student does, or certainly did in the 70s, which is get hold of a camera and shoot some stuff. And most of the stuff I shot was exactly like what every art student shoots. But there are a couple of things that are of interest, well, maybe of interest. And one interest to me, and one was this little film I made. So I've reconstructed, it's the actual footage, but I've digitized it. And it's basically silent, but I put a bit of Super 8 projector track. I know it's a bit corny, but it gives it a kind of feel. So this is it. That kind of just stayed for almost 15, 20 years before I made another film based on that idea, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. And I left art school, and I wasn't making animation. By the time I left art school, I really wanted to make films. I knew I wanted to make films, and I didn't want to make films for galleries. In fact, that didn't exist in the late 70s. There were no galleries showing artists' films. There was no really far from being a market for art. There wasn't even a kind of screening place for artists' films in galleries. and I joined the London Filmmakers Co-op, and I began to teach myself how to make films. And the first film I made was based on this lady, cow. It was a 40-minute film. I called it the Cow's Drama. I spent about 3 years in the field with this cow, 3 summers. It was a farm I knew because I'd worked there, and I followed this cow around. But I didn't want to make a documentary. I really wanted to make a drama, but I didn't want to have actors in it because I didn't want to have the idea of people acting or kind of, you know, dressing up or playing a role. And I couldn't think, and I thought the best thing to use would be an animal, but obviously it shouldn't be a kind of, you know, a scaredy animal. It had to be a big animal who wasn't going to be scared of me filming it. And it couldn't be an animal that would move too quickly. So I chose a cow really for very practical reasons. And I thought I was going to do quite a kind of arty movie. You know, it's going to be very cutty or abstract imagery, but it wasn't at all. It really I just spent, the whole movie is 2 days following this cow in its every moment of its life, really, although obviously it's very condensed because it's a 40-minute film. And it does a lot, you know, it goes to the cowshed, gets milked, feeds its calf, goes back up, and so on, and, you know, sits and eats grass and sunsets and everything, and then it happens a whole other day after that. The second day is much quicker, and no doubt everyone expects some dramatic moment, but nothing happens. The same second day ends the same way as the first day. And so this film got shown a bit. I mean, I thought it was a work of genius, but I still do, of course. That's why I'm here. But yeah, it was shown in some art shows, and certainly everyone who sees it remembers it. But I'm not going to show it to you now.
May I just ask, was that a 40-minute film? That's an impressive undertaking. Was that funded, or was that all coming from you?
No, completely unfunded, and also not only that, I was so ignorant about making film that the first time I shot it at the wrong running speed. That's what I say. I spent one year shooting it at the wrong running speed. Then the next year I went back, so it had to be silent. So I wanted to do a sound film. So I went back the next year, shot it again, but there was something wrong with the film stock. And the whole project had to be ditched. So the third year I shot it and it worked, but I had to go back the fourth year because I needed some pickup shots. And that's 4 years. I made a few films that seemed to have a slight success. One of them was shown on Channel 4. I'm just seeing if I've got it here actually. Yeah, so there were moments where I really thought something was going to happen and I was going to begin to make a career of making films. And later on, you know, to begin with, I was doing all sorts of jobs, painting houses and stuff like that to earn money. But eventually I began teaching, and I set up a very small film workshop in South London. And that's really when I began to learn to teach. But I never managed to have any continuity with making films. I put a huge amount of money and effort into making one film that would take about a year or two to make, and then I would try and get it shown in festivals, and I'd travel around a bit with that film, and then I'd try and build up work on another one. And as I'm sure some of you know, it's really much more time-consuming making films and more stressful when you're paying for them yourself. And really, a big change happened to me in the late 90s, because you probably all know the Animate scheme, which was for low-budget experimental movies. Well, this scheme, the kind of well-known and successful animators wouldn't apply in the early days for Animate because the budgets were too small. They would be getting money at this time directly from Channel 4 who were putting a lot of money in animation. And so it was, let's say, certainly at the beginning, probably less competitive than it was much later, Animate, when the money died out of British animation and it became the only funding scheme left. So Animate was really open for kind of experimental filmmakers, which I was, doing animation. And I had this idea which was based on working directly on film. But it wasn't abstract like most work direct on film. It was based on engravings. So I had this idea of actually making a whole film based on Gustave Doré's engravings to his comedy, to the Divine Comedy, to Dante's Divine Comedy, which is a great story to use in experimental film. Because in one way, it's a very simple poem. It's about a journey into the centre of hell. So it had different episodes. You could easily try different things out in different episodes. And the engravings were very beautiful. A lot of depth in them. So I kind of filmed the engravings, again because I wasn't an animator, I filmed them live action on 16mm, and then I got them blown up, which is the only expensive part of the project, onto 35mm, and I just scratched them. I've got them printed dark, and I just scratched them, getting the colours out of the film stock. And so it's really exactly pretty much what the craftsmen, the wood engravers would do when they made an engraving. The artist would make the main drawing, and the wood engravers would trace around the lines on the wood block. And I put some tests in. I remember making tests for a year. I made some tests. Because it was 35mm, I didn't have the equipment to look at it. So I went to a cinema where I knew the projectionist. And I remember looking at this minute in the dark, and I really couldn't judge whether it was good or bad because I just hadn't seen anything like it at all. It just was very, very odd. And then I applied to animate the project, and for the very first time, by this time I was 36, and I'd been 14 years since I left art school. This was the first time I actually got money to make a film, and I can show a little bit of it. I'll show an extract near the end where we're really getting into hell in a big way. His name's Andy Cowton. I'm sorry he couldn't be here, but I didn't invite him. And we've worked together on nearly all these films, and it's very important to me, sounds very important to me. It's very important in animation in general, of course, maybe much more so than any other film form. But for me, there's a little moment in that film where that was a very difficult film in a way to make a soundtrack to, because it needed to support this kind of arc of a journey, and that part of the arc was going from abstract to a still life, and part of the arc was to kind of represent the man himself and his engraving and his life, sounds of the city and so on. And to me, a very special thing, which I know was his idea. Sometimes we argue, if it's my idea, with sound idea, he always says it's his. But this one was definitely his idea. And that was to have these big bells of the city playing. And then as the camera pulls out and you see it's a still life, the bells suddenly become much smaller and they just become part of a little clock. You can hear distinctly the sound of a clock chiming. So the scale of the sound in that way, which is not at all dictated by the picture, it's just a sound idea that relates totally to the idea of working in a room and the city. But it kind of corresponds exactly to what's happening in the image, and just makes us feel suddenly we're in a very small space, in a very big space. So I I suddenly there was this point where it seemed like every TV channel wanted a scratch film made by me, and so I made quite a few more. This one I won't show; it's quite long, but it's one I made for the BBC. But there's quite a funny incident there, which I don't tell my students, and that is that I was. The BBC, for people who don't know, is the most conservative of all the kind of funding. They're very old school. And I went down there with a load of tests, these scratch tests, and I took them, what I had as tests, is I basically had this very bad dark engraving, and then I would be doing scratching on top of it, and that's the bit I wanted to use. But there'd be other stuff around it. And we went down to the technicians, and every time a bit of my scratch footage came up, the technicians would go, "Oh, no, I don't think this won't work at all." You know, so there's a hill in Gloucester, it blocks out the signal there, you know, this isn't going to go across. And then whenever the bit that I hadn't done came up, they go, "Oh, that's okay, that's fine." It was awful. It was awful. And then afterwards, I was talking to the guy who commissioned me, Colin Rose, and he said, he was trying to get hold of my technique, and he said, "Well, do you make an animatic?" Now, because I'd never studied film, I had or animation, I had no idea what an animatic was at all. I mean, at the time, you know, I didn't know whether I should bluff it or not, and I bluffed quite a few things, but I thought, okay, I won't bluff this one. So I said, "What is an animatic?" to him. I mean, now that seems very funny when you know, he just commissioned this film for about the same price if you could buy, you know, quite a big flat in London. And he's going to find out that the filmmaker he commissioned it from didn't know what an animatic was. He looked really like a guy who put money on the wrong horse for the moment. And so I just didn't want to make any more scratch films. I suppose it's as simple as that. I was managing to make films. I was making about one film a year. I would be kind of finishing one film and I'd be applying for another. So I had this kind of completely different from what was happening in the 80s for me. I was having this continuous process where there'd never be a break. I was still working on film, so when I had a film camera, I'd be doing tests for films, some of which would never be made, some did. And I applied with this other idea to animate again. And this you'll recognise because it's based on my student film. And again, I'll show a little extract of it. And so, just to kind of wind up this half of the set of this talk, at this point, I did this Nestor Fellowship, and it was natural, as it was impossible anymore to really consistently get money to make films. I went back and started doing more teaching, primarily in the UK at the National Film School, and also another course in a university, an undergraduate course in Switzerland. And I've been doing those two, as well as other teaching jobs, for the last 10 years or so. Just a brief thing about commercials. I mean, like everyone, most animators are asked to do commercials. It was after some of the scratch films that I was first asked to work on a commercial. And the first one I did was I did several actually, but the big one I did was the only scratch film I made was for National Panasonic, a really big commercial made in Japan, and where I found out that my style was known as lotus draw, which I think is nice. It's not my invention. I don't know where it came from or who coined it. But I found for my work that teaching is easier to do than commercials. I'm not a very successful commercials maker. I've made about one every 3 years, and I think I'm lucky for that, because it's really difficult to combine commercials. Maybe people here who've done it, but for me it's very difficult to be available to do commercials all the time, and and work on your own work. Whereas with teaching, it's much more organised. You know pretty much what you're doing during the year, so it's possible to arrange to make films around that. But that's a kind of survey of the work I've been doing until recently. And maybe, what do you think, Martin? Should we have a break, or should we have some questions? Or?
Why don't we have a 10-minute break now, and then in the second half have questions to begin with? Does that suit everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can we have a big round of applause for Paul?
Kind of building a house than doing a painting or writing a poem, and it's full of all sorts of different decisions that don't have a kind of huge apparent impact. You can't tell what the impact is when you make a small decision at the beginning of the film, how it will affect the film. And so there's a lot of kind of, let's say, it's to do with aesthetics, but it's also to do with processes and what I like doing. So there's some things I really like doing. I know most filmmakers, and particularly animators, like certain things and don't like other things. So there's a kind of way of, all this comes together, and it does alter the way films look. And that's definitely true, I think, with all my films.
But do you think, Paul, just to follow on, because you were thinking that the performance could happen across a number of frames, and then the other performance could happen across a number of frames, and then the two would be intercut, which would give a very different effect.
It would, because you feel, I think if you cut two lines of action together, you'd feel those actions were running in parallel tracks, being intercut. But if you change every frame, every frame is different in relation to one.
Yeah,
so I'm sure that would be different.
Yeah, it does. It adds a different
it's less
strange
sort of
lumpiness.
less mechanical.
Yeah. I mean, when it was commissioned for this touring dance program, and it was kind of digital, and everyone else's work was so kind of processed. And I remember my film looked so odd and old-fashioned. It's such an old-fashioned piece of music and ballet, that's very old-fashioned in the context of, digital contemporary dance programming. And I overheard kind of all the kind of contemporary dance people saying, the music is so lovely. At last I can appreciate the music. Because they hadn't been allowed to kind of appreciate ballet. They hadn't been allowed to appreciate Tchaikovsky. But because it was so kind of lumpy and ugly, suddenly the music, they were allowed to kind of enjoy it. It's like a, postmodernist piece, although it wasn't intended that way. But I was criticised by Aardman once. I heard from a third party who said they really liked Jekyll and Hyde, but it all moved around too much. And I just thought that was, that pretty much said it. We've all got our aesthetics, That's fair enough from the Aardman point of view, I think you'd have it moving around quite a bit, wouldn't you, Stuart?
No, probably not. Okay. I'm afraid that it would be that sort of horrible mechanical way, But the way you've done it, there's just that sort of difference, that sort of edge where things are not quite matched up, which sort of creates another kind of aesthetic, I suppose.
Well, I always thought I was a control freak until I worked in animation, and it's like someone said, what's a pessimist? The definition of a pessimist is someone who lives with an optimist. And so for me, I've realised I always thought I was a control freak until I started working with animators, and now I realise I'm really kind of quite a cool, relaxed guy. And fun to be with. But all that work that you've seen was made on film, apart from Babildom, and I'm going to show you my most recently finished film now, which I could talk a bit more about how it was made, and and that, again, with all my work, it's like a scratching film. It's often a struggle. It's often setting something up, like trying to copy an engraving, but you're copying it so small. You try as hard as you can to get the line in the right place, but it's impossible. So it changes all the time. So I'll just show you this film first. It was actually funded. So after a long period, I went through another long period of not getting money, and I've had a number of kind of possibilities of making money, making a project in co-production with a company abroad. For a long time I was making a film, working with an idea, developing an idea with National Film Board of Canada. But they actually put up 60% of the budget, but I couldn't get any money in the UK, and their budget could not pay they'll pay for the films we made, but they wouldn't pay for me. They wouldn't pay for anyone from England. They wouldn't pay for Andy if I wanted him to do the sound. And I spent 2 years applying to everywhere. No one would, even though the National Film Board of Canada was definitely in there, which was quite unusual because they normally would come in second, not first in a foreign project. I just couldn't get the money, and in the end I decided I'd make the film without them, because it really annoyed me, the idea of making a film in which everyone was being paid except me. So I'd rather make a film, which in the end I did. I made the film for nothing. This was a previous film. And this time it was a Swiss company. I'd been teaching in Switzerland a long time, and some Swiss friends and German friends set up a small company. Now Switzerland is very well provided for financially in arts funding, particularly in animation, and like all my students, any of my students who were any good at all, a year after they left would be making a kind of independent movie. And they also pay really well, almost too well, because they insist on minimum charges for all the people who work on it. Kind of, it's not union, because if you know Switzerland at all, you realise they don't have unions there. It's not like that, and there's no employment rights. But they do have lots of, all the cantons, all the different departments have money, and so but I still was obliged to find money from the UK. And this is, now I'm a great evangelist for the Arts Council. So finally, after years and years of applying for the Arts Council, I suddenly got money from them. And it went like this. I applied to the Arts Council for this project as a co-production with a Swiss company, and they said no. And so I rang them up, because they said they'd answer the question. They said, oh yeah, you qualify fully, because it's very transparent. The process is supposed to be very transparent, and they're supposed to give you all explanations. And yeah, you ticked all the boxes. It was absolutely fine. But when we came to the meeting, there wasn't enough money and you didn't get it. So I said, well, why am I one? And that's what you don't get answered, of course. But because I had ticked all the boxes, I could reapply. So I reapplied again, and I got no again. Meanwhile, the Swiss money was taking a long time to come through, so I couldn't start the film. So I applied a third time, but this time I just applied to be annoying. I really didn't think I'd get it, but I just applied. I just thought, I had all the form, I just had to, it's online, so it's annoying, you have to cut and paste everything back in. But anyway, I got a piece of paper through the post from the Arts Council, and I thought that was weird. I almost threw it away, and then of course I realised it was a contract. So the third time I got it, and so I made this film with quite a high budget, because while I was waiting for the Arts Council money, the Swiss company got one lot of money, and then they applied for another lot, and it's a bit like a ball rolling downhill. So the Swiss, or I reckon the guy who did the post-production on the film kind of earned about 4 times as much as I did per hour on his work, because all the money had to be spent in Switzerland. But also what happened is that well, another thing is I teach a lot, and a lot of the things I do, because I'm not an animator, I don't really teach animation, but I do a lot on story development, and I teach a lot of graduation, the graduation year. So I spend a lot of time with students developing their projects. Now, when what we expect students to do usually is make a film in a year. Usually, most of the courses I teach have a year more or less. And about 3 months of that is developing an idea and then getting it into production. And we expect the model for most students is an independent movie. That's the kind of standard model. Students do other things as well, but the kind of standard model is a standalone, 3-4 minute film or 8-minute film, which comes from the student's idea, something they're passionate about. So that's the standard model. But the thing is with my movies, and I was giving a talk to a new current generation of students, and I thought I'll use this as an example, because I'm sure I took several years to develop this project, quite apart from the time I spent trying to get money for it. So I thought it was probably 5 years between when I first wrote the first treatment and when I got the money. And so I looked it up and checked my emails, and I found out it was 10 years between writing the project and getting the film made. But the odd thing is it didn't really seem that... So, what I was saying to the students is that it's really hard because, people don't make independent films from nothing to a finished film in a year. It's an unreal expectation. It's not, we shouldn't use that as a model. But it was also interesting to me is that it hadn't felt like this project was lying around for years and years. And I realised as you get older, time has a different kind of meaning. When I was younger making films, I would have thought it was ridiculous to wait 10 years to make a 5-minute film, 6-minute film. It just seemed impossible even that the ideas would still be valid in that much time, or even, I don't know, the scale is different. And now I'm older, I realise I've got a lot of projects, some sat around for 20 years, and maybe most of them won't be made, but the time scale is kind of different for me for making films, and it's a kind of comforting thing in a way, although, I know a lot of my ideas that I'd like to make won't get made. But time has it's less urgent, let's say, in one respect. As time runs out, it's less urgent.
And the film is all about time.
Well, it's often put in. I'm always amused. I'm always amused. It's put in often put in several times. It's been in the non-narrative section of film festival competitions, and I just think this is ridiculous because it's the most narrative film. Ever. If you have the story of man-made objects for 5,000 years, how can that not be a narrative? I did have. I've done a lot of films using objects, animating objects that I haven't shown you. It was really, really great to get into a museum and actually be able to animate, old things. And I tried a lot. One of the reasons why it took so long to make a film is so many places turned me down. I tried to get into museums, British museums, Victoria and Albert, I'd be able to get so far along the way, and then someone would say, then there'd be a barrier and it's impossible to go past it. So I was very lucky to be able to do it in Switzerland, where there's a completely different outlook towards access to these things. They do have more staff, it's true, but there's a much more willingness to look at opening up museums. I mean, the V&A, the British Museum, they're institutions that they sometimes have artists in residence, but I think they have an idea of what they mean by an artist in residence. They have very specific, they're very big old institutions, and it's quite difficult to enter into those places and do the work I want to do. What you saw there, because this is actually a collection of stone slabs that make up a church.
Yeah, it helps that you saw the title.
Yeah, I know, I realised that after. It'd be must have cut it off.
Yeah.
But this is, I didn't think of that. I didn't think I was going to ask that question at the, I only thought of that now. So this is a church, apparently a modernist church in Switzerland near where I work. And that's what it looks like on the outside. I passed it 100 times without even looking at it. I thought it was like a warehouse building. And inside, it's entirely made of strips of stone, like that are completely transparent.
Oh, is it? Are they? They are
Translucent.
stone.
Yeah.
They're not glass.
They're stone. They're stone. So that's the film. It's not abstract. It's very concrete stuff. It's stone, but of course the patterns are abstract. So it's very similar. In this case, unlike the other church, the other film, the museum film, I've got all the plates. We photographed every single stone, and they look like this.
Does the film include every stone on the building?
No, because you can't get at some of them. Some of them got these bars in the way, but there's about 1,000. And they have patterns in them because, of course, they're cut through layers of stone. And so I'm just playing around with the patterns at the moment.
They look like oil paint, don't they? Or painting almost. At first of all, I thought it was stone. That was the very first thing I thought.
Right.
And then I thought of oil paint, and then I thought, oh, well, it could even be, just painted straight onto the film emulsion. Yes, it's got all those
Some bit, yeah.
qualities,
Yeah.
particularly when you break it up into the frames as well of the thing, which is almost like frames of film. So it's quite.
Well, when I first walked into the church, I just thought they were like frames of film, and that's why I thought of making a film, because they look like, they just, to me, they just look like strips of film.
It's a very similar church you did in Berlin.
Is it?
And it's one of the churches that was bombed, and then they made a modern church next to
Yeah.
the ruin of the old one.
I think someone mentioned it.
Yeah, and it has similar qualities to it. But I think the blue one is glass, not stone.
Yeah.
The still images quite reminiscent of the surface of Jupiter, like the patterns.
Yeah.
But then once
I've
they're
seen that
activated,
as well.
you sort of lose
I've seen that, and sometimes they look like weather maps, kind of like the satellite weather cloud formations as well.
There's a performance artist called Tim Spooner who makes sort of like microscopic live performances, similar with lots of textures, and then sort of narrates the sort of Solaris style narrative over it. It's sort of quite funny with that.
So this is another kind of co-production between Arts Council and the Swiss company. And I'll just show the thing that I'm going to be working on next, partly to show the kind of prep work I do, which isn't a huge amount, but when I was in Portugal, I was speaking recently, or some festivals, spoke to a Portuguese animator and director, and he said the thing that probably every filmmaker, people say this to you and you just think, oh no, it's going to be a terrible idea, and that is, he said, I've got an idea for you. And he said, he knew I rode motorcycles, and he said, someone near me has 5,000 motorcycles in a private collection. He'd never seen it though, he just heard of it. So of course I didn't believe it. Or I thought it was just like a barn, rusty motorcycles. In fact, there aren't 5,000, but there's a hell of a lot of them. And this is it, and we went and visited the collection, and the guys agreed we were going to make a film of it. And so this is the animated film I'm going to make next year, if all goes well. And this is the test for it, which is just done with 2 motorbikes. But basically we're going to go for a ride using hundreds of motorbikes. Afraid it's not running to speed, but
Is the sound on this?
no. but I can do it. It would be brum brum. Brum, brum. No, they're all over. They're all Europe. They're mainly Europe. The best ones are all European.
So you're going to go all through the places that they come from, like go through.
No, it's not as easy as that. They're very heavy. but it's it's quite difficult. In fact, this is the storyboard for it. Okay, I don't like doing storyboards, but I did have to get the money. So it's basically going to be it's going to be bicycles to these kind of very low level motorbikes. You know, the small there's another word for it in the 50s. Mobilettes, yeah. And then then they become motorcycles, and then a guy comes and cleans it. We use lots of details, but the bikes are going to be changing all the time, basically. And then he goes off on a ride. Bits of this. Just an excuse for showing hundreds of bits of motorcycles, and then he goes off. And he goes off for a drive, and then there's a really interesting end, which I'm not going to show you.
Did it have to be a ride?
No, it hasn't been fixed actually. That's a good point.
I hate to say it, but
Okay,
I
that's
think we're
it.
going to have to
Yeah.
round things
That
up.
is
But
it.
are there any last questions?
What do you put the light on?
Yeah, I'll put the light on.